Отже, вітаю всіх учасників
Greetings to all the participants of this Kyiv Security Forum 2020, which is going under the special conditions. My name is Taras Berezovets. I will moderate the discussion first. We'll listen to video addresses by two well-known Belarus politicians. The first of them is the first chair of independent leader of the independent Belarus, Stanislav Shishkevich, and the second will be Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, Belarus activist and person who is believed by many as a winner of last elections in Belarus. After that, we'll talk with Oleksiy, Danilov, Linas, Linkevicius, Ivanna, Klympush-Tsintsadze, as well as Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who will talk about modern situations. And we'll finish today with U.S. panel, in which the leading American experts and diplomats will participate. I'm informed that Stanislav Shishkevich, the first chair of the Parliament of the Republic of Belarus, as well as a leading Belarus politician, is in contact with us. Probably understand that Belarus does not belong to free countries, and what we believe to be a routine thing like a large speed internet, for them it's not like this. So let's listen to Stanislav Shishkevich. Stanislav, good evening. We are greeting you from Kyiv. Good evening. Stanislav, quite recently, in one of your recent interviews, characterizing the current president of the Republic of Belarus, who was for the sixth time, who believes that was his sixth time he is elected by your nation, you called him totalitarian, dumb, badly educated leader who is subordinated to Putin. What do you think? Will Belarus be able to get out of the grip of Russia and Putin today? The Belarus today wants to get out of these grips of Lukashenko, supported by Russian power. The Russian power tries to restore the empire in the form of the Soviet Union or Russian Empire, and that's why it do whatever it wants. There is no democracy in our country, and they envy Ukraine, where they elect the authorities, and they support Belarus, where there is no constitutional power. Why do they need such a giant empire? Maybe they don't have enough intellect. They want to supply it with Belarusian and Russian. And unlike in Ukraine, the authorities in Russia are not elected. They just change from time to time. But the major principle of democracy, change of leaders after a certain period of time, is not observed. The most competent commissions, like Venice Commission, recognized Belarus constitution, which was adopted in a falsified manner at referendum, recognized it as democratic and irreparable. And now Lukashenko declares that he's going to change it. Why didn't he change it before? The people are fed up with this. People have a right for their dignity, using any possible means. In your opinion, what would be the result of the current Belarus protest? Whether the people who raised against dictator Lukashenko be able to win? It's hard for me to answer your question, because those methods, when a 73-year-old woman is beaten by police, when people are killed by police, when the Belarus government gets weapons from the neighboring country. I cannot tell you, colleagues, what will be the end of this, because I do not actively participate in these events for the reason of my health, but I believe that this will finish quickly in a dignified manner. What does Alexander Lukashenko still have in his arsenal to throw Belarus under the feet of Vladimir Putin? Lukashenko is getting the support which nobody in the world has never got. He doesn't have money to pay to his bandits who beat demonstrators. The Russian authorities provided him with $1.5 million to support those bandits. You cannot call them another way, because when people beat children or elderly women, there is no democracy. According to the Constitution, peaceful protests are allowed, but Lukashenko invented laws in which the provisions of the Constitution on the freedom of protest are recognized illegal. And our eastern neighbor likes this. And they hope to get hold of Belarus as it was in 18th or 19th centuries. It may lead to forced Russification. Stanislav, you were among those Belarus politicians who immediately condemned the illegal and legitimate annexation of Crimea and supported Ukraine. But unfortunately, many representatives of Belarus opposition didn't have enough stamina to recognize Crimea as Ukrainian one. What do you think? What is the major problem of Belarus opposition? Why don't they call things a spade a spade? It's hard for me to answer your question, because I didn't hear it well, but there is one problem. Russian authorities, Crimea, they believe well-known politicians, including Brzezinski, who recently died, and he said that empire will not exist without Ukraine. That's why they want to get Ukraine and Belarus. They want to add Belarus intellect also to their empire. We have excellent examples of real Russian intelligentsia, intellectuals, like a number of well-known actors that support Belarus protests. About European Union, let's hope that Sakharov Prize will raise the enthusiasm of our opposition. Thank you very much on behalf of Kyiv Security Forum and personally on behalf of Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Prime Minister of Ukraine, organizer of this forum, and on my personal behalf for your position. Very well articulated messages which we hear from you, and it's very important for us to know that in Belarus there are politicians who support Ukraine, and traditionally, Zhive Belarus, which means long live Belarus. Long live Belarus, long live Ukraine, and long live real good Russian people, not those who belong to Russian authorities. Thank you, Stanislav, for very important participation. And now organizers of Kyiv Security Forum will demonstrate the address of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a leading Belarus politician. Many people in the world call her legitimate president of Belarus, and it was recorded specially for Kyiv Security Forum, this address. Maybe they have to restart it with the properly organized soundtrack. We've heard from Stanislav Shushkevich, the first chair of the Parliament of the Republic of Belarus, important things which unfortunately other representatives of Belarus do not say. When I had the chance to talk to Oleksiy Tsepkalo, a person who also claimed the presidential position, we couldn't get from him the words about whose Crimea is. And also asked Mr. Shushkevich as well about this, maybe because of the communication problem. He couldn't hear that, but the problem of articulation of what's going in Ukraine, what's going between Belarus and Russia, this is of relations between Ukraine and Russia will complicate the relations between Ukraine and Belarus opposition. And I understand Ukrainian politicians, both pro-governmental and oppositional, who wants to understand, to find out what do Belarus politicians think about what's going on in Ukraine. Unfortunately, we can't get this information. Same way Madam Tsikhanouska was asked by journalists. Okay, now let's listen to Madam Tsikhanouska. No. She stubbornly doesn't want to talk to us, maybe because she doesn't want to recognize Crimea as Ukrainian completely. All right, maybe then we'll change the course of the discussion. Let's invite Secretary of the National Defense and Security Council of Ukraine, Oleksiy Danilov. The same also will, I hope, will also have participation of Foreign Minister of Lithuanian Republic, Linas Linkevicius, Vice Prime Minister of the recent Ukrainian government, Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, as well as American Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was the commander of American forces in Europe in 2014. And I know that Mr. Linkevicius wanted to be the first to speak at our discussion. Is there any communication? No. Then let's begin with Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of National Defense and Security Council. Every participant of the panel has 10 minutes for presentation.
Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to take part in this very important forum. We are living in a very turbulent and interesting, challenging world where there's no telling what will happen in 5 to 10 years. If we go back to the issue under discussion in this panel concerning Belarus, I'd like to say the following. What is power? Power is primarily about credibility, the trust of the people towards the powers that be. If you have credibility, you have power. Otherwise, you have only a position, and you can keep your position only by using brutal force and armed forces. How it is going to end in Belarus, it's hard to say. I remember that we were elected at the same time in 1994. I was elected as mayor of Luhansk, and at that time Lukashenko became president of Belarus, and he has been holding that position for 26 years, and no changes occurred in that country. Likewise in Russia. For 20 years the same person rules, and there's no democracy, no free election or anything like that, unfortunately. Going back to the question whether the Belarusian people will be able to win in this standoff, it's hard to say, because as Mr. Shushkevich said, the Russian Federation will do its very utmost to make an impact on those processes. They have always tried to influence economically and otherwise, and now they will see how the situation develops after the 1st of November. The elections in Moldova, they can develop a tougher stand and pull in the military to the territory of Belarus. This is a big challenge for us, for Poland, for Lithuania, because there is a triangle that we have to bear in mind, and we keep in touch with my counterpart in Lithuania, in Poland, and we are very much concerned about this. And the tasks which Putin set before himself in terms of bringing Ukraine and Belarus back into their fold, into the area of influence of the Russian Federation, in order to have a new constitution. They have never tried to hide this intention, and they've been trying to achieve this from the very first day once they came around after 1991. So we can have other panelists, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, ex-Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Linas, Linkevicius, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all on the second session of Kyiv Security Forum, and the floor has National Security Council Secretary Mr. Oleksiy Danilov now. Прошу. Продовжуйте, пане секретар.
I'd like to point out that I personally believe that the year 2008 was the year of great change. Unfortunately, we did not expect that what happened in 2008 would happen, because we were not granted map. At least two countries insisted on that Ukraine should not get map. In 2008, there was an open aggression of the Russian Federation against Georgia, and then after that, this brazen conduct, since Russia got away with it, they continued that line of conduct, and Russia continued its influence in the region. The results are well known. This is the occupation of Crimea and part of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. And unfortunately, I re-emphasize, the situation in Belarus will be very complicated, and if it's going to be getting out of control of Lukashenko and Putin, what can happen there is that Russia can pull in their troops, unfortunately.
And now,
Thank you.
Mr. Linkevicius can hear me, I would like to address you, Minister. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at Kyiv Security Forum. Minister, recently you said that the United States targeted Russian GRU for their criminal activities in cyberspace. No country has weaponized its cyber capabilities as maliciously as Russia. Minister, talking about viruses, especially viruses in informational space, do you see that West, European Union and Lithuania, do they have common strategy how to tackle Russian malicious efforts?
Of we're talking about cyberspace, we have to talk about all hybrid threats, I believe, which is also very important and becoming not less important. Understanding is increasing. If I recall our discussions in the Council of European Union, let's say 7 years ago, during the presidency of Lithuania, it was very difficult to agree that we need to do something in the area of strategic communications, for instance. And later it was clear, but after every country got own experience, went through own, so to say, path, and understood how it is important, that's now not questionable. Cyber was never questioned. Cyber is really, cyber threats increasing especially. And unfortunately, the sources of this kind of disturbances coming from the same countries and notably from Russia, as we all can trace. So nobody has immune, be it Eastern European countries or Western European countries, depends on the scope. In Lithuania, we're looking at this challenge quite, it's a kind of our niche capability, I would say, because developing our own capacities, national centers in cooperation with the United States, or also our own national leading rapid reaction teams on cyber defense in European Union, structural defense cooperation called PESCO, also trying to establish center of competence in European Union, competing with others, so trying to specialize. It has to do with our overall activity in this area. So it would be wrong to underestimate this threat in the future, and that therefore we need to combine forces and to share practices. So why we are standing very firm for inclusion of third countries in the cooperation with regard to structural defense cooperation of European Union. It's not yet agreed, as we probably know, but we would like to have this decision. It's very important. Regardless, are we members of European Union or NATO, we have to share practices, and also in particular in cooperation with the third countries like Ukraine, Georgia. And I'm not mentioning United States, not members of European Union, but definitely United States also should be part of this pool. So we are developing own strategies, national capabilities, but we really did not use potential to make it stronger, better, to unite our forces, and that's to be developed in the future. So if there's a question about hybrid threats, I'm just mentioning this.
Right. Minister, just before you, we had a pleasure to listen to Stanislav Shishkevich, first head of Verkhovna Rada of Belarus. We discussed case of Belarusian opposition. We also discussed the problems with Belarusian opposition. From your perspective, the strategy which Mr. Putin is pursuing on post-communist space, particularly in Belarus, in Ukraine and Lithuania, do these countries, Ukraine, Lithuania, not Belarus, unfortunately, at this stage, do they have a chance to establish the common strategy how to fight against this Putin aggression?
Well, we should develop a strategy anyway, but the situation is quite different. For Lithuania, Lithuania is in different space, Ukraine as well. But when we're talking about this area or Eastern European part, all these hot spots or conflicts, getting to the point that role of Russia becoming more and more dangerous. And by the way, good to know that tomorrow we will celebrate 75 years for United Nations. It's a big anniversary, and we're discussing about role of that country, about P5 role, Security Council, which is supposed to stay on guard for peace structure in the world. And we see how some members acting in vetoing very important decisions. Not only in Europe, but let's mention Syria, more than 10 times it was vetoed. But when we are talking about other hotspots, it was also not easy to discuss these issues, in particular Ukrainian case during our presidency in the Security Council in 2014, 2015. It was really very difficult due to the same reasons. We managed to have this public debates, but it was not official meeting, and we couldn't manage to reach any official decision. So very difficult to develop strategy when you do not have leverages. But when it comes to the role of this possible countries like stakeholders, we really can see that responsibility lays exactly with Russia, because they're creating conflicts rather than solving these conflicts, and through these conflicts trying to manage the situation. And it's not just Ukraine to be mentioned, it's also, I can mention South Caucasus, I can mention 20% of annexed territory of Georgia, which is still happening, as we know. We also can mention this conflict now between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's very, very difficult to trace what are the roots and why it happened now, but we know quite well that, again, Russia, through a long period, took kind of active stance in supplying weapons to both countries, and now, after conflict again emerged, their role surprisingly moderate, and we cannot understand what is happening. So it's again, the point is not to going too deep into the analysis of this conflict, just to say that again, through managing this hot conflict, becoming not crisis manager, but rather not crisis manager, but simply instigated these conflicts. And Belarus, also to mention, again, stakeholder could influence situation a lot, as we can see, but still supporting this outgoing compromised leadership in Belarus. Although there are other options maybe to choose, but we're still waiting what will happen. It's kind of political and moral stalemate in this country. And we see that time is running. Time is not on the side of people who definitely courageous, patient, fighting, standing on the streets, trying to protest, but being intimidated, put into the custody. And time is running, as I said. Winter is approaching, and maybe outgoing leadership would like to save time, trying to imitate dialogue with the opposition in prison, which looks very weird, but this is happening. Trying to invent some kind of constitutional reform process, which also will save time, and maybe counting that, as sometimes happening, they will present this new reality, and people in the West, the Western community, international community, will take it as new normal, new reality. And again, the role of Russia very important here, which side she will support. And that's, again, the question, what could be the strategy? So the strategy would be, the least I can say, consistent, clear, united messaging to all these stakeholders, which is not always happening. Sometimes what we're doing too late, and sometimes too little, collectively and individually. And there is the situation when we can see that all these dictators, they are simply winning because of lack of consistency from our side, because of maybe really, as I said, we delayed decisions, or decisions which are not tangible and visible, rather just rhetoric. And I don't know whether it's strategy or it's just common, so to say, disease, which should be really addressed by all of us. And when we mentioning these conflicts, really what I just mentioned, Caucasus 2008, annexation of Crimea 2014, now other places, it's happening and repeating. So we are meeting and all the time discussing what are the root causes, what are the mistakes. And unfortunately, I can say that really mistakes are done, and lessons were learned by aggressor, but lessons were not learned by international community. And so that's why everything is repeating. Is it strategy, it's tactics, or something else? Good question, let's discuss. But I believe whatever really we will do, we definitely should do that on time, not too late. We should be consistent in our approaches. And again, coming to Ukraine, if I may, since we definitely, Ukraine is on our mind all the time, and we're looking at the situation really quite concerned, knowing that it's not easy and war is still going on, and no changes whatsoever happening, basically, except maybe return of some war prisoners. We cannot see any improvements there, even worsening of the situation. Passportization process goes on. Well, also restrictions for OSCE observers to access the areas of observation. We see no changes in the logic to address the conflict, and we still believe that security should go first and then some political arrangements, not vice versa. Otherwise, the situation cannot be solved. So we see also kind of stalemate. So what we can do, definitely, least we can do, we should continue pressure with sanctions, first of all. We are managing so far somehow to reach this consensus in extending sanctions with regard to Crimea, with regard to international, individual lists or economic sanctions. But this is definitely not enough. We should do more. And also should help Ukraine on performing reforms. Regardless the situation and regardless this war, reforms must be continued because it's unavoidable. And ownership lays, again, with Ukraine here. But the international community should be proactive here. And I believe this conference, what we were forced to postpone, which is supposed to take place in May this year, but due to pandemics postponed to next year. But I have no doubt it will happen, and we will continue bringing together not only political, so to say, players, but also international financial institutions, BRD, AB, World Bank, and these conferences, chain of conferences, which started in London, then Copenhagen, Toronto, Vilnius, and next stop already clear will be Switzerland. So we are really the process in good hands, and I have no doubt we will continue in the same spirit. So, in short, fight corruption, fight aggression, fight oligarchization, which is unfortunately not yet stopped, make sure that anti-corruption structures will be working sufficiently, and, well, great impression that nothing will prevent Ukraine from continuing on the way of reforms, because there are some symptoms and impressions sometimes that some faces which are familiar to the international community, reformists are disappearing and replaced by others, and this is also should be stopped. So there's so friendly advice, as always, friendly advice to continue in the same motivated spirit, and we will not just stand by, but will be proactively participate where it is possible, but ownership lays with Ukraine, definitely.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your personal leadership, for a crucial role which Lithuania is playing in our region, especially in Ukraine, especially in Belarus. And thank you so much for your efforts, for your endless support to Ukraine and to Ukrainian people. Thank you so much, Minister.
Appreciate it.
Unfortunately, Minister Linkevicius would be too busy. He wouldn't be able to continue this panel discussion with us, so we will proceed to Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze. Ivanna, good afternoon.
Добрий день.
Як ви будете відповідати українською?
Good afternoon. Are we going to speak in Ukrainian or in English? In Ukrainian, I think. Okay. Right. So we'll switch between languages. Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze, you live in the. You are now working in the most pro-European Ukrainian region, that's Transcarpathian, and it borders on several EU member states. Can you see any new red lines that emerged between Ukraine and its EU members because of the pandemic, because of the economic crisis? Otherwise, speaking differently, does pandemic have a potential to break our cooperation? First of all, I would like to respond to what we've heard from you, from your dialogue with Mr. Sushkevich and about the situation in Belarus. I think that we as Ukrainians cannot but support them. We cannot stay on the sidelines and observe dispassionately what's going on there. As a country of two Maidans, of two revolutions, we have to formulate, to articulate our clear position vis-a-vis Belarusian opposition. We understand that Lukashenko is a dictator, and we should insist that he should leave. At the same time, we should understand that Belarusian people are going through certain stages of self-identification that we in Ukraine have passed some time ago. Unfortunately, Ukraine is at the very beginning of that path, and perhaps the Belarusians do not fully apprehend the risks and the threats that we've faced. We all know, and God forbid them from repeating our past, but one of the catalysts of our self-identification as a political nation was the Russian aggression, and the challenges, the risks and the threats that we were forced to face because of that. And we understand that Ukraine is now facing some risks akin to ours, and they should be fully aware thereof. To us Ukrainians, it is extremely important to have a clearly articulated position. We should not be turning a blind eye to this situation, and perhaps take on the leadership role in going to Europe and inviting Belarusian people to join in, to follow suit. And we can do that with the help of large international institutions and through separate or individual geopolitical projects that should gain traction, like the Lublin Triangle, and here I should pay homage to Mr. Linkevicius. And we should stop playing political tolerance games vis-à-vis the Russian Federation, and we should be very clear in articulating our refusal to accept the position of the Russian Federation and their interference, their meddling with our internal affairs, not only with the countries or regarding the countries that are close to the Russian Federation, but throughout the world. Now I'm staying in Transcarpathian. It's the closest Ukrainian region to the EU member states, and it should have been the most pro-European region, but unfortunately it's not the case, and it ranks the 24th in all indicators of Euro-integrational criteria. So this closeness to the border does not encourage local authorities, local government to exploit this closeness to the European border. So as far as the pandemic is concerned, I wouldn't say that it's the pandemic that has limited our opportunities to cooperate, or just due to limited or restrained exchange of people in Europe, but also we face the challenge of incompetence and lack of capacity at the central and at the local level in terms of boosting trans-border or cross-border cooperation. It might be a driver for the development of this region, so that it in turns actually acts as a driver for the entire country. Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze, how do you see the resolution of the Belarusian crisis that we are all discussing here? And even though you say that Ukraine should be very proactive and should be assuming the leading role, does not meet those expectations, but countries like Poland and Lithuania are shouldering this responsibility. What do we lack in Ukraine? I think we in Ukraine lack a clearly articulated position, and at the very top management or top leadership of the country, we lack understanding of what is true diplomacy. It seems like our leaders think that diplomacy is about being very careful about walking on shells or eggshells, but it's about actually articulating your national interests, your position, and to discuss and to reason your position, trying to persuade them to take our arguments, our reasoning to account. We so far have failed to actually articulate or formulate this position vis-à-vis the elections in Belarus last August. And even the parliamentary resolution that was adopted some time ago, even though it recognized that the Belarusian administration acted brutally and that the violation of human rights cannot be tolerated and cannot be accepted. This resolution, nonetheless, does not clearly recognize Lukashenko as illegitimate. Likewise, our government, our executive authorities have not formulated their position. It seems to see eye to eye with the European Union, but this position is not, as I said, clearly articulated. We are a country of two revolutions, and we have to be very clear in that position, and we should use all the tools available to us and create new tools to support Belarusian people. I thought about this initiative of Eastern Partnership as well of the conduits, because that's the tool that is already available in relations between the EU and Ukraine, the EU and Belarus. And I think that this very initiative, Eastern Partnership, should be translated from an abstract policy, abstract tool of cooperation into the very realistic, very tangible policies of the EU with regard to the Eastern European countries' integration into the civilized world. I do agree that diversified approach to countries with a clear intention to get integrated into the EU and those which are still on defenses and are deciding what to do, that is true. But today we are in a good position to establish additional tools of financial support, economic support, political support, and that will help the Eastern European countries actually state that they are aspiring to move towards Europe, but also withstand aggressive intentions and attempts of the Russian Federation trying to draw them back into that zone of influence.
Now I'd like to address Commanding General United States Army Europe in 2014-2017, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. General, thank you so much for your analysis, especially analysis in your forecast which you made about Russian intervention to Ukraine due to the humanitarian crisis with water resources. I must confess I have a YouTube channel, and one of my YouTube presentations which I made like a couple of months ago was extremely popular. It got so many views thanks to you, General, because I quoted your forecast about Crimean crisis. And still, in this forecast, you said that you think that Russia may intervene militarily to Ukraine in September, which luckily never happened. But still now, in the end of October, do you still believe that Russia can produce another humanitarian crisis which it will use an excuse for its military intervention to Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and also for the opportunity to participate in the Kyiv Security Forum. Actually, I would not turn out the lights on concerns about Russian intervention in Crimean water crisis. What we don't know is how much equipment and how much logistics were left in place after the conclusion of the Kavkaz exercise. And for me, the key indicator was always, from an adversarial standpoint, the logistics, what preparation was made. That's when you know this is more than an exercise. And I think that the Kremlin certainly is watching the local elections and the results of local elections in Ukraine. The disinformation efforts are continuing, and the whole approach is to create a pretext to do something. And typically, they try to create a situation, whether it's in Belarus or Georgia or Ukraine, where it appears to be a humanitarian crisis, and therefore they have to intervene. Look, this is about competition. This is about great power competition. And I believe that great power competition prevents great power conflict. And you have to compete in the diplomatic space and the information space and the economic space, as well as in the military space. And that's how you demonstrate that you are interested, that you care about a particular area or a particular function. We did not do this. When you don't do this against the Kremlin, then you pay the price. Today is the anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. And of course, the Soviet Union came in and crushed them in just a couple of weeks. And so because the West did not react strongly to this, the Kremlin obviously felt no pressure from the West and continued to use force elsewhere around Europe. The failure of the United States and the UK to respond to Russian violation of the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine agreed to disarm itself, to give up its nuclear weapons. And we see Kremlin intervened almost immediately after this was done. And the fact that the United States and the United Kingdom did not actually live up to their obligations, I think further encourage the Kremlin. So that's why I say you have to compete. And when I look at the map, and I'm an old person, so I still believe in having big maps. When you look at the map, you see that Ukraine is the keystone state for the Black Sea region. It's the keystone. And that the Black Sea is what I would call a cauldron of competition. It's the place where we have to compete. The strategic importance of Ukraine, of the Black Sea region, is not appreciated in Brussels, and it's not appreciated in Washington. And so all of the Black Sea nations, led by Ukraine and Romania, need to put their voices together in Washington and in Belarus and in Brussels to raise awareness so that we can raise the priority of the Black Sea region. I believe that Ukraine will eventually become a member of NATO, as President Bush said several years ago. I believe that Georgia should be a member of NATO right now. That Ukraine, it's going to take a little bit longer, but I believe that this is coming down the road, and Ukraine should continue to do all the things in all of its different ministries and in these different domains to enhance its integration with NATO. Key to this will be for all of us to never, ever accept any annexation by Russia, any claims to Ukrainian sovereign territory. You can never acknowledge that. I was a lieutenant in Germany in 1981, and I remember thinking that Germany would be divided forever. But because all of us stuck together and were persistent, Germany was eventually reunified. And I'm very proud that the United States and many other countries never officially acknowledged the annexation of Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia into the Soviet Union. This is very important. And I think that we have to maintain that same attitude towards Russia's invasion and illegal annexation of Crimea and Russian forces in the Donbass.
Thank you so much, General. We'll now proceed to National Security Council Secretary of Ukraine, Oleksiy Danilov, and you will have another time just to intervene with your remarks later. Отже, пане секретарю, нещодавно президент України підписав закон.
Secretary, recently the President of Ukraine signed a law on the development. Many experts believe it's critically important for European Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine in the new national security strategy. There is also indication on joining membership action plan. But we have heard stories raised by journalists like Wagner team case. Also, it was informed that President Zelensky met with the head of MI6 British intelligence, Richard Moore. in the course of which allegedly they discussed the issue of information leak. Can you say that we still have mutual confidence between Ukrainian special services and Western colleagues? I would like to say yes, you're right. On the 14th of September, President Zelensky signed a strategy of national security of Ukraine, for which is the roadmap for the whole term of his presidency. And the problems which you mentioned today are clearly articulated there. That is accession to NATO, European integration of Ukraine, as well as a clear assessment of behavior of Russian Federation and so on. Speaking about special services work, I cannot give you general comments on how it is done, but I can only say that at the moment these services operate in almost in every country, and it's a quite complicated issue. Speaking about trust and confidence, I should say that there is no delays. Cooperation goes on, and another law which President signed about the intelligence is yet another step of Ukraine towards accession to NATO and towards joining European community. There are many interesting things over there about our services, how they operate, the way of their interaction with their counterparts. So I think that is a fundamental law which was signed by President Zelensky. I also believe in terms of reforms, there is some criticism of the processes, but I should say that there are two fundamental laws which were recently adopted. It's first of all a law on land, and the second about geospatial data, law on geospatial data, which is very important. Another very important issue which concerns the fact that many American and European experts believe that pandemic has created favorable conditions for authoritarian regimes in China and Russia for them to implement their plans. We see in part the consequences of this pandemic in Belarus, as well as the beginning of war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Do you, at the National Defense and Security Council, evaluate or assess risks, military risks coming from Russia related to a pandemic on the territory of Ukraine? Unfortunately, Russia does not need any pandemic to try to implement their intentions. Speaking about pandemic, it's a challenge for the whole world. And when this story started in Chinese town of Wuhan, nobody could imagine what would be the consequences for the whole world of this pandemic. Nobody knows when will it end. No vaccine, any declarations about a vaccine which has been developed are not realistic. Coming back to this question, I would like to say once again, for Russia to do its barbaric deeds, there is no need to have a pandemic or no pandemic. They do what they want. I want to tell you that Russia itself is an artificial entity. It was, in fact, set up under the arms when all the nations were combined forced to join each other. And any empire falls apart, and the day will come when we'll see it about Russia. But I can, frankly speaking, I cannot say how come Ichkeria, which is Chechnya, may be connected with Russia. They are absolutely different people, absolutely different cultures. The same question which General Ben Hodges answered to you, whether Russian Federation may resort to arms in order to restore water supply in Crimea. this issue has been repeated constantly in mass media. They informing about terrible things, that there is no water in Sevastopol and other towns. I want to tell you that occupants are responsible, first of all, above all, for the situation on the territory, and this is the problem of Russian Federation. On the other hand, Ukrainian people cannot supply water to Russian military in Crimea. That would be nonsense. We have very simple proposal. We discussed it. Putin pulls out all his military, all his troops, tanks from Crimea, and we supply water to them. And we always say, we didn't come to you from Ukraine. And our position is very public, very open and understandable. We cannot supply water to the occupants for them to build up their military potential there and to have an opportunity to attack Ukraine once again. Thank you. Ivanna, I would like to ask you the following question. This week is going to be the public opinion polling by President Zelensky, and one of the questions is about Budapest Memorandum. What would be your assessment of this opinion polling? And then the question, how can Ukrainian authorities use these results of this poll? Frankly speaking, I do not understand why the president of Ukraine, who is responsible for the constitution, foreign policy and security policy of the country, should have any additional blessing on using the platform for communication in the framework of the countries who signed Budapest Memorandum from his people. I don't understand the logic of this question. As far as I remember, in 2014, when we had a transition power, transition authority, when the parliament took over the responsibility after Yanukovych left the country, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine of that time, Andriy Deshchitsa, in the discussion, I think Danilov remembers this very well, the first discussions, first consultations after the beginning of aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine were initiated exactly with the countries signatories of Budapest Memorandum. That's why after a long time, since the beginning of the aggression, after that memorandum, which unfortunately didn't protect us at all, and in fact appeared to be a very weak document after Ukraine got rid of nuclear weapons, led a number of resolutions, beginning with the resolution of the UN Assembly and other, including parliamentary resolutions. Therefore, I see no logic in asking this question, especially in view of the fact that President Zelensky said that this is not a question on which Ukrainians in their kitchen think over. Whether they will be able to use the results of this opinion poll, I sent a number of requests to the law enforcement authorities and Ministry of Interior and the Central Electoral Committee of Ukraine as an institution responsible for organizing and running the election in Ukraine about a violation of legislation by this opinion polling declared and funded by only one political force, which is the participant of the political process of the electoral run. And I think it will be implicit, in some places even direct, promotion of one political force and advertising on one political force. But as far as there is no methodology of doing such polling, there is no special forms which would be used, or no special control of situations like when one person may answer a number of times.
The polling is not going to be representative in any way. It's profane. That's why it cannot be put into the foundation of any decision to be taken in Ukraine. If there are attempts to do it that way, I'm sure that a lot of political parties and a lot of representatives of civic society will oppose that and trying to prevent turning Ukraine into a travesty of democracy. We do not acknowledge fake referenda and polling. We've seen fake referenda on the territory of Crimea and in the occupied Donbass, and I think it is unacceptable that similar fake referenda are used in an independent, law-governed state of Ukraine. I would like to add to that. I'm not going to comment on the political speech by the madam who has just spoken. My name is Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze. I do remember. Thank you. I would like to go back to the consultations at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The consultations had to be followed by some additional steps, but after that came the occupation of Crimea and a part of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. Thousands of Ukrainians were killed, and the actions of our and steps of our partners should have been much more resolute. If we fail to stop people like Putin in their tracks, what did not happen in 2008 when the Olympic Games were opened, all that is the prerequisite and background for what happened later. And I can say that the Polish Republic and Lithuania, which are close to the border, will be very much under threat. That's why people who signed the Budapest memorandum should have been much more resolute.
Hodges, General. We're looking very closely at the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia these days. And I would like to hear your analysis. What do you think, what do you evaluate the role of Russia in this conflict? Do you see that at any stage this conflict will include Russia and Turkey as fighting sides?
Well, first of all, I hope that the conflict is brought to a peaceful resolution soon. Hundreds of people have been killed, including many civilians, thousands of people displaced. So I hope that we can get to a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. I think, however, that the Kremlin is waiting to see, how far the Azeris will go. The Kremlin, of course, provides weapons to both sides, has done so for a long time. Russia has bases in Armenia, so there's no doubt that they're watching this very closely. And of course, Turkey is playing a critical role with its support for the Azeris. The three main points that I would want to make here are: number one, this is a very important strategic area, and I don't think it's appreciated by many in the West. But there are only three ways to move east and west between Eurasia and Europe, whether we're talking about air traffic or energy pipelines or telecommunications pipelines or land travel. One of them goes through Russia, one of them goes through Iran, and one of them goes through Azerbaijan and Georgia. So if we want to make sure that we can protect that middle route for air traffic and energy pipelines and telecommunications pipelines that won't be disrupted by the Russians, then we need to make sure that we don't end up with Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh because for sure they will never leave. So that's number one, protecting the sovereignty of this area without Russian interference. Number two, it's clear that what Ukraine experienced fighting against the Russians beginning way back in 2014, what we have seen in Syria and in Libya, and now what we're seeing in Nagorno-Karabakh, the use of unmanned aerial systems is changing how modern war is conducted. And anybody can put unmanned UAVs, drones in the air. And this is something that all of us have got to make sure that we are adapting ourselves. Certainly my soldiers, American soldiers, learned so much from Ukrainian soldiers about what it's like to be on the receiving end of Russian artillery and Russian rockets that are operating in conjunction with their own drones. So every modern army has got to have this sort of capability. And then the third point, of course, is that you've got to be able to stop this capability. Watching tank after tank, truck after truck destroyed on the ground on the Armenian side or the Syrian side. And this is all Russian-made equipment, by the way, Russian-provided equipment, reveals their vulnerability if soldiers are not well-trained, if they're not disciplined, if they have not learned how to conceal the signature of the heat and also the electromagnetic of all their radios, communication systems. If you can't hide that, then you're going to be found and you're going to be hit. So this is another lesson learned for us. We changed our training in the U.S. Army because of what we learned from Ukraine, and now what we're seeing in Karabakh is reinforcing the importance of this. I hope that the United States will play a strong role. You know, the Secretary Pompeo is meeting today with the foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. We don't want to see a conflict. We don't want to see Russian troops entering this conflict in any capacity.
Well, General, thank you so much for your brilliant remarks, and we would be looking forward to hear more forecasts about Ukraine, about Russia, about Belarus and the whole region. Thank you so much, General. І я хочу подякувати так само
Likewise, I would like to thank other panelists, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Mr. Danilov. Please give them a round of applause. Linas Linkevicius, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, and ex-Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze. Just bear with us for another couple of minutes. We will hear an address, pre-recorded address by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Well, she stubbornly refuses to talk to us today. Maybe she wanted to be invited personally.
Belarusian opposition is speechless, as usual.
I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you physically on the Kyiv Security Forum 2020. I'm thankful to the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and his team for a kind invitation. I admire the spirit of solidarity which we have in Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear brothers and sisters, for supporting our peaceful protests. We are very much inspired by your readiness to stand for your dignity, for national freedom, for your rights and your future. Your revolution was based on the breath of freedom, and this breath will never fade away in the east of Europe. I'm thinking about Lech Walesa, uprisings in the Baltics, Václav Havel in the Czech and Slovak republics. we are continuing that trend. And so the question is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for freedom and for our right to be respected. But likewise, we are fighting for independence of our peoples. Just like you fight for territorial integrity of your territory, we are fighting for our Belarus and our independence, for your freedom and ours. Thank you very much. Finally, we've heard the address from Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya. As far as I know, she's planning to visit Ukraine in the near future, and we hope that we're going to meet with her, and maybe Arseniy Yatsenyuk will arrange that meeting for us. This concludes our panel discussion. We will thank Oleksiy Danilov, the only participant in this panel who was here physically. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And in 15 minutes after the coffee break, we will hear from Oleksiy Reznikov, Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister for the Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, to be followed by the Transatlantic panel. Thank you. Thank you.